So good evening.
Good evening.
So part of what we'll do for this evening, we'll do a brief check-in, and then we'll have a talk. And on this evening, I want to talk about impermanence, equanimity, and some of the experiences within the Black church, in particular as relates to relationships, questions of hope, as well as social justice. And then we'll have about a 15-minute sit, and then we'll have a conversation together. Any joys or sorrows or anything that people are sitting with? Just a brief check-in. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Our church is preparing to perform the Messiah on the 18th.
Wow, wonderful.
But things are going well. There's no snow on the ground, so
that's right. That's right.
Things are going well.
Good. Kirsten?
Also, I want to say that today is the anniversary of the Pearl Harbor bombing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm doing well. No major complaints. Slight joy. The edited volume that myself and my colleague are working on is going into production. So hopefully it'll be published next year, early next year. Challenges. My mother is experiencing some challenges related to aging. So as a family, we're beginning to kind of navigate that. So.
Okay.
And Kirsten, are you still with us? She may come back.
She may come back.
Okay. So.
I had trouble getting off mute, but I'm here.
Okay. How are you?
I am doing well.
Good.
How are you all doing?
Good.
That's good. I'm about to take my dog for a quick walk, and then I'll turn my camera on when I get back in.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll begin this talk on equanimity and impermanence and some of the experiences of the Black church. And equanimity is known by a few names. It is one of the four Brahma Viharas, or divine abodes, or what are called the four capacities of the awakened heart, along with loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. And equanimity is also understood as a complement to the other three that allow us to engage in loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy without being attached to one expression of them. So the first aspect of equanimity is a quality of evenness or balance of mind. So I want you to consider the way that change is a constant in the world. It is the truth of impermanence. Consider the changes you've experienced in the past year, right, through the pandemic, the past week, just today, or this past week, over the course of your lifetime. One way of capturing how we experience our world of constant change is what Buddhist teachings call the 8 worldly vicissitudes. These are the experience of gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, and pleasure and pain. So you consider any one of those experiences and consider just all the changes that come with that and the way they affect our emotions, our states of mind, etc. So equanimity helps us to realize that all of these experiences are temporary. Cultivating equanimity helps us to relate to all of them with more skillfulness and wisdom. And increasing awareness of impermanence loosens the bonds of craving and attachment. In mindfulness meditation, we see the truth of impermanence as it relates to our own thoughts that are arising and passing away. We cannot hang on to any of our experiences. Thus, we grasp feelings, experiences, and people as if they are ours to keep. The nature of desire and the things that bring us happiness are transitory in nature. Everyone here can imagine things they once desired, but desire no more. There is within the Black church a tradition that cultivates wisdom regarding impermanence. When the tradition is at its best, I would argue, it encourages people that when they are at the end of their rope, to tie a knot and to hang on. Or in the words of the late Bishop Michael Graves, to hang on to heaven when hell is on your back. Or that trouble don't last always, and that joy comes in the morning. It's easy to dismiss this tradition as merely preaching or teaching false hope. However, this form of encouragement and edification is based upon the truth of our existence, right? The truth of impermanence. It reaches directly into our emotional states and reminds us of their true nature. In this sense of being with what is not yet, it captures the arising and passing of all things. Hymns such as "Hold On to God's Unchanging Hand," that time is filled with swift transition. All of these, again, these edifications and encouragements are still based upon the truth of our existence. So they don't represent a kind of false consciousness. It's actually the opposite. I first began thinking of this relationship when I served as a pastor, and there were a number of individuals in our congregation just going through a lot of life trials and tribulations. And I remember not feeling as if I had a message to give to them. I remember ransacking all the commentaries, you're going through different scriptures and books, and you're trying to assist people in material ways, getting recommendations and just, all that you can do. But I really felt that nothing was alleviating, right? The sense of stress and despair. And I kind of intuitively fell back on this tradition. And I preached 2 sermons. One was called "Holding On to What You Don't Have." The other was going on when you can't get over. And what I realized is that oftentimes in the life of the church, and Black churches in particular, this tradition has become so routine, or we use it as an instrument to try to maybe shout people. But I think we've neglected its deeper importance. We've neglected that it isn't just something to make people feel good. It's also based in the truth of their feelings as such. It's based in the truth of our existence. So the other aspect of equanimity concerns our interpersonal relationships. And when I was growing up in the church, there used to be a saying, I would hear elders say, "God don't like ugly." And I want to acknowledge a debt here to Emily McRae, she's a scholar who works on the Buddhist teachings, and she relates equanimity to moral ugliness. And there was this language of God don't like ugly, and it wasn't a matter of condemning a person. It was kind of part rebuke and part encouragement, admonition. It means that you were behaving in a way that was unattractive or rude. Today, we might say, I wasn't showing up as my best self. So moral ugliness is a kind of minor imprudence or immorality. It's some form of irresponsibility. And I want to suggest that that we all know that relationships become more complicated over time. And over time, the closer we are to somebody, there's a good chance that our own ugly parts might come out. And no matter how committed we are to our own self-improvement or spiritual development, some of our ugliness is gonna show up. Some of the harms of moral ugliness are frustration, anger, hurt feelings, resentment, disappointment. I want to give an example. Again, when I served as a pastor, I would do an exercise for couples who were engaged to be married. And I would ask them to write a list of 5 things that they loved about the other person. Then I would ask them to list 5 things about the other person that if they were to disappear, they wouldn't mind at all. Right? If those things were to disappear tomorrow, they would just let them go without any question. Right? And so what was interesting is that each time I've done this exercise with couples, when they shared the 5 things that they wouldn't mind if they went away, the other person would, their chest would get tight, their breathing would get constricted, their eyes would roll, right? They've heard it all before, right? It's nothing new. But when they shared what they loved about the person, there were things there that the other person had never heard before, which is fascinating because you're preparing to marry this person. You're preparing to spend the rest of your life with this person. So it was this powerful moment of realizing that you're still getting to know this person, but also that sometimes in relationships, we rehearse our dissatisfactions. We don't always articulate the things that we genuinely cherish about someone. Equanimity allows us not to reduce people to our dissatisfactions, not to reduce people to only the things about them that cause us harm or frustration or anger. So equanimity allows us to maintain a kind of broad, more spacious view of people within our interpersonal relationships. I want to welcome Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for being here on this evening.
Joy to be here.
And we're doing a talk right now on equanimity and impermanence, but I just want to take a moment just to introduce ourselves and just welcome you into the space. And again, apologies for you not being able to get on earlier. So my name is Christophe Ringer, and I had the pleasure of teaching with Southside Liberation Center. And this is a part of a mindfulness meditation teacher training program that I've been involved in for the last 2 years. And this is a part of our practical. And I'll allow others to introduce themselves as well.
My name is Richard Mosley. I am a retired United Methodist pastor, currently serving a United Methodist Church on the South Side.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello. I'm Kirsten Hoyle. I am the founder of the Inner Success Movement. We are a digital community that's dedicated to the journey to inner peace. And I am in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area.
Good to meet all you all. Andrew Wilkes. I'm a co-pastor in Brooklyn, New York. Have written a number of books, including with my wife called Songs for Black Lives. Most pertinent to tonight, am in need of leaning into what is about to be taught tonight. So looking forward to it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Andrew, if I recall, you're also a very much into Howard Thurman as well, correct?
Yes.
Howard Thurman? Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. I want to give just a kind of a working definition of equanimity. The equanimity is the freedom from two main kinds of vicious habits of mind, namely craving habits, infatuation, neediness, clinginess, and habits of resentment, hostility, and hatred. And the equanimity is characterized by feelings of tranquility and spaciousness that allow us to engage with others and ourselves in both novel and more virtuous ways. It's also important to realize that equanimity is an emotional state. Sometimes it's talked about as the absence of emotion, but really equanimity is a feeling of calmness, a feeling of freedom, of spaciousness. But it's not just a freedom from, it's also a freedom for. A freedom for new ways of engaging a loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. So how does cultivating equanimity help us in our relationships? It helps us to avoid a certain kind of craving where we say, I must have this, and also to avoid a certain kind of aversion in which we say, I can't deal with this. So equanimity is not about ignoring problems or resigning ourselves to problems in relationships. Rather, it allows us to address a problem in an appropriate way. So we can relate to a problem without exaggerating it. We can relate to a problem without downplaying it. I'll just share two stories. One other story, in addition to what I just shared. This past summer, I was at a restorative justice conference and heard a wonderful story about a woman who worked in the attorney's office. And this was shortly after the uprisings of 2020. And hundreds of young people were possibly facing felonies. And she talked about how she worked out a program. She began to start a program in which those young people would go through a restorative justice process that was located in community. And if they were to successfully complete the program, then their record was cleared. So there was an opportunity for them never to actually go in front of a judge. That she was a restorative justice practitioner, and the state's attorney said, I want you to do that work in my office. And after her presentation, I noticed that I can't recall the exact number, but I think it was in the thousands. But I noticed that the number of young people that went through her program wasn't the same as the number of people who were arrested. So I asked her, what about those young people that were not in the program? What were the reasons that they chose not to participate? And she said something really interesting. She says, well, it's a complex problem, but she said, I'll give you an example. There was a father who refused to believe that his son would be out in a protest, even though they had him on video, right? Essentially destroying a police vehicle. The father simply refused to believe that that was his son. And so the father had resources, father hired an attorney, and he was going to fight this legally. I share that story with you because part of equanimity in keeping an open, more spacious perspective within our relationships. And let me preface this by saying I don't have kids, but here's a moment in which a father could not see his son in a more spacious light. That this one moment in time, he could not accept that this is who his son was for this one moment, for this one time. And the consequences of not having a more spacious view, right, are very serious. So again, another example of how equanimity can really impact our relationships and how we see one another. Also want to talk about impermanence as it relates to the question of social justice. And social justice has a long history within the tradition of the Black church. And here I'm referring to what I like to call the prophetic wing of the Black church. There's a long history of social justice work. And I've thought a lot about impermanence because part of how oppression works, part of how empire works, empire makes us believe, or attempts to make us believe, that there are no alternatives. That how things are simply how they must be. So part of the gift of impermanence is that empires fall, right? History is littered, right, with the dustbin of empires, right? So even in the Black church, we have songs where we hear the language of giants do fall. Right? This is the insight into impermanence, that even empires, right, whether it is, and here I'm dating myself, but I'm old enough to remember when there was such a thing called the Soviet Union, and it is now no more. Right? Apartheid in South Africa is no more. So the gift of impermanence is to say that all oppressive structures and regimes and powers, because they are things of this world, they are by definition impermanent. But there's also a difficulty with impermanence. And here I'm thinking about, you may have seen this floating around on social media, but there's an image of a woman at a protest, and she's holding up a sign saying, "I can't believe I still have to protest this." Right? And when you talk to elders, right, who are on the front lines of so many struggles in the past, there is a despair there. There's a despair that we are still having to fight, right, the recurring, right, powers, and to see Roe v. Wade fall. Right? Part of what we have to remember, part of the truth, the difficult truth of impermanence, is that when we win victories, it's so tempting to feel that we've won something, and it's tempting to feel that thing we won is permanent, that we've won it and we can just relax, right? But rather, if we take seriously impermanence seriously, it means that when we win, Warnock, right? We're experiencing this elation, and we should experience that. We should rejoice, we should celebrate, but then the next day, we should then move to nurturing. We should then begin the work of tending. We should begin the work to say, we've won this, but to be very clear that what we've won is a new state of affairs. What we've won, we will not have for all time. And if we can maintain even a spacious and awareness, a kind of equanimity, even towards social justice victories, we can avoid despair, and we can also begin to think towards the future and to realize that because of impermanence, new individuals who are committed to social justice arise, new leaders arise, new advocates and activists arise. So impermanence doesn't lead us to a form of resignation or evasion where everything is changing, therefore nothing matters. And I mention that because sometimes when we do experience political defeats, I hear people say, well, politics doesn't matter. Right? The work of social justice doesn't matter. See, this can all get turned around. Rather, impermanence says we fight, we struggle, and when we have victories, we celebrate and we begin to tend to them. And when we experience defeats and setbacks, we don't despair because those too are impermanent. So I think equanimity and impermanence are virtues so the Black church can continue its prophetic work and it continue its legacy but it can do so for the long haul. And that these are virtues that we can cultivate to sustain us in that prophetic work. Thank you for your time and attention for this talk. So we're going to go into about a 15-minute sit, and then after that we'll have open conversation. And Andrew, we're recording this, so I'll make sure you get the first part as well. So if you would come into an upright posture. Posture that's comfortable for you. Just take one inhale and exhale. And just bring your attention to your breath. As you begin to feel your body release tension, allow your body to relax, your attention resting on your breath. Sensing the air moving in and out of your nostrils or mouth. If you find your breath is difficult to rest your attention on, rest your attention on the rising and falling of your belly. Allow that to serve as your anchor. And as we sit, we acknowledge that all created things arise and pass away. Joys, sorrows, pleasant events, people, buildings, nations, and even whole civilizations. Allow yourself to rest in the midst of all that is ever changing. In these closing minutes, we want to intentionally cultivate a heart that is at rest and balanced in the midst of all things. Let us bring equanimity to all of the events in the world. May we bring equanimity even to the fruits of our labor, that we may accept the good they bring for whomever may be blessed by them for a time. May we practice equanimity to avoid despair at injustices that persist in our world, and to realize that although patterns of injustice persist, they're never permanent. And that our work for a more just world is rooted in compassion and the desire to alleviate suffering for all beings. May we learn to see the arising and passing of all things with equanimity and balance. May we experience true equanimity. May we be balanced and peaceful. May we live with a peaceful heart. And let us come together. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So this is our time for.
Thank you.
This is our time just for conversation. Anything that is coming up for you. It's time for us to dialogue.
And Dr. Ringer, I certainly identified with your stories as a pastor, being in a church where sometimes it's hard for us to sit with any particular feeling. We want to move quickly. Are there any recommended references that you would recommend, either articles or books that can capture what you have just shared with us, in particular with regard to the Black church? I certainly believe that even myself, I get caught up with this thing is going to last forever and it's not going to change. And I don't have any particular practice that I go to that reminds me that things do change. Nothing lasts forever. So I didn't know if you had any particular follow-ups that you would recommend for us.
Yeah, there are some. What I can do, if you allow me to, maybe email.
Sure, that'd be
Some
great.
references.
Right.
I mentioned Howard Thurman earlier. I think there are certainly some resources in Thurman, but also even within what we call the insight tradition.
Okay.
There are some resources that I think capture that both as a practice, but also the truth of that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm really grateful for the chance to just breathe with Black folks together,
Mm,
and to
mm,
see, really grateful. I can't even tell the half of it. And the chance to feel and not just think, but to feel
mm,
my breath as like an ally in the work, or support in the work, rather than something to just not really notice, I guess.
mm, mm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I first started this program, it was pandemic had just kind of started, and one of the interesting things was um, how do you adapt a tradition and practices that are so focused on breath at a moment in which people are experiencing COVID, in which they may not have access to breath, and of course the connections with um, issues of policing, right? And Black people being, we can't take breath for granted either, right? And so part of what I've kind of been really sitting with is what does it mean to have a practice that's often oriented around breath, both in the midst of that, right? In the midst of policing COVID, and but also to be cognizant of that, but then also to offer a practice of reclaiming.
I don't know. Today was kind of different. What was coming up a lot for me was um, having the opportunity to sit and breathe is a privilege,
Mm,
and how much of a privilege it is.
mm,
Sometimes, as people of color, we don't get to always have that privilege,
mm,
or our ancestors before us didn't have that privilege as well.
thank you. Kirsten, when you mentioned that, I'm wondering if there is also, again, thinking about kind of the connection to a tradition, which social change is always related to personal change. And I'm wondering, is there something I'm wondering about stewardship of privilege, right? Not only the acknowledgement of it, but what does it mean to be a steward of it?
That's very true, because just because you have privilege, you cannot be a good steward over it. Just like with money, right? We're talking about breathing right now, but money, time, things, you have to steward over. Having time to be still, having the time to breathe, having the time to sit and hear from God. It's a privilege, but it's also just like anything worth, you working for it.
One of the things that I really appreciate is that I especially felt this moment, and discovering more and more, is that breathing, in a context that often kind of socializes Black men of whatever gender identity against our emotions, that breathing somehow helps me to kind of like feel stuff I can't quite say and pinpoint in other ways. It's like, oh, this is how I actually feel. And I didn't expect to weep, for instance, during this moment, but had two good Denzel Glory tears, one from my right and the left.
Mm.
That is so real. That is so real. Yeah. I mean, part of, I think part of the gift of the practice too is kind of this unlearning, right? Especially as men, and Black men in particular, kind of a deep conditioning, right?
Mm.
Around issues of emotion and feeling, and yeah, I mean, this is, I mean,
Mm.
yeah, and I mean, going back to creating, how do we create those spaces, right?
Mhm.
In the midst of social situations, which um, it might be wise, right, to have a certain kind of exterior, right, in terms of self-preservation. But are there moments to disrupt that, and are there moments, and even, and I've experienced this myself. As a matter of fact, I was talking with some friends about this, that um, sometimes we can be long removed from those situations that required us to be a certain way,
Mm.
and yet we still it's difficult to cultivate a different way of being,
Mhm.
even after we're no longer in a certain kind of situation.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're just about at time. So Richard, I'll make sure, and Andrew, I have your email. That's right. So next week, we're also going to be looking at the question of issue of joy, and the kind of resonances between how we understand joy within the context of the Black church, and often within insight traditions, the idea of conditioned joy and unconditioned joy. So we'll be looking at that. Well, thank you all so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
Have a wonderful
Thank you
evening.
so much.
You too.
Thanks, you. This is awesome.
Good night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.